In order to grow with hydroponics, you need fertilizer, you need clean water, you need equipment to test the water and test the fertilizer in the water, pH, EC, ppm, TDS, all different types. And people always have some amazing results, especially those on YouTube that influence people to grow hydroponically. And they actually are true. You can create amazing products with hydroponic techniques. And let me be blunt, it's even possible to create a better product than organically grown produce. And the reason is they can adjust the fertilizer to the need of the plant. A lot of organic growers, they use a lot of manure, compost and all that, but it's only effective in the beginning of the season, and at the end of the season, well, a lot of that stuff ain't working again, or there's too much nitrogen in the soil and the plants get too much nitrogen in the fruits, therefore a lower Brix. And with fertilizer for hydroponics, you can actually adjust or make micro adjustments. Also with hydroponics you can introduce organics like V2 booster of Nitrogrow Solutions or Rootguard, or even living soil, although we do not advise it to use living soil in a recirculating system. But yeah, you can introduce organics and therefore create a better taste profile. But it's not always necessary. The reason why a lot of people introduce organics is that the fertilizers are more efficiently absorbed with the plants. It's a very specific technique. It's an ionic exchange, and therefore it's pulling more ions due to the organic matter inside the plants, and it's taking with more nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium ions with it. It's a really efficient way to introduce more fertilizer in the plant and therefore get a better overall product. By the way, I'm not saying that organically grown produce is worse or you're not going to get the same results, but you have to do way more work than just plain introduce fertilizers, compost, and looking at your plants. Because when you want to have the same results as plants that have been grown hydroponically, yeah. And this is also one of the things that's really annoying, because I've heard that a lot, because obviously I do grow a lot of product on hydroponics, drained waste, recirculating, or what. It's that it's easy to grow in hydroponics. Yeah, maybe on the world of YouTube, but in real world it's a pain in the ass. So let's talk about some pros and cons of growing hydroponically. Yes, the overall yield and growth of the plant is more extreme, but you're feeding your plants in order to support that growth. If people that are growing organically use the same amount of fertilizer and make the same amount of micro adjustments, if it's possible and if they want to, they actually will have similar results, but they have to spend a lot of money in order to get that process, in order to get the produce out of it. So that's one of the reasons why it's not sustainable in that way of growing to do, which in hydroponics is actually pretty easy. For example, tomatoes. Tomatoes really thrive in water with fertilizer, and therefore it's a full-blown hydroponic technique. They're using slabs and they get, I don't know, between 100 and 150 kilos per square meter out of it. You can get a lot of products and you can create some really big plants with hydroponics. But again, you also can do the similar thing with organics. If you're using the same amount of fertilizers and doing a lot of techniques, which a lot of people in gardens really don't want to do because they don't have the time for it. Second is the equipment. You need some very specialized equipment. They don't have to be expensive, but you still need to have them. One of them is called an EC meter. It's measuring the electric conductivity of the ions in water, and is not checking for the individual fertilizer. So it's not checking for the N or the P or the K, so nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. It cannot distinguish one of the other. So it's an average of a total. And therefore it's actually a flaw in the system, because when people are growing hydroponics, they're using water and fertilizer way too long, and they actually get deficiencies because guess what? Plants grow, and therefore the nitrogen in the water is going to decrease over a period of time. But you also need to change the water each week, otherwise your EC value may not be changing because of evaporation, but guess what? The ions in water, they're in the plants eventually, otherwise those plants will not grow. So pH, it's a really important part of growing hydroponics. The reason is, when you have the wrong type of pH, the plants will not absorb nutrients. Some nutrients are actually not even soluble in certain pH ranges. So the pH has to be on point, but it doesn't have to be exactly precise when you're not growing commercially, because changing the pH based on what the plants need is actually way more efficient than keeping the pH range on a certain level. Commercial growers always have it exactly between 5.7 and 5.8, because that's the range where most nutrition is actually accessible for the plant. But guess what? Calcium, magnesium, nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium has their own specific targets in which pH range the plants actually can consume it the most efficient. So when you have a certain deficiency, say calcium, so calcium is a really good example. It's something that all plants need except for vanilla and certain types of species that really don't like calcium for some reason. It's the stuff that the plant in the canopy, so therefore they need a lot of calcium. But calcium, in order to be absorbed, the pH has to be around 5.8. Otherwise, when it's too low, it's not accessible. And from 5.8 to 6, actually 6 is more preferred for calcium. 6.2, it's the upper limit. And after that, actually calcium has the capability of crashing down out of solution, and therefore it's no longer accessible because it's in a different form and it's not in water soluble form anymore. So 5.8, it's fine, but when you have a calcium deficiency, you actually want to switch it up to around 6. And therefore, when you see certain types of deficiencies, you have to make micro adjustments. And that's something nobody is talking about, because on all packages, everybody is saying, well, pH has to be around 5.5 to 6.5. Yeah, there's a really big story behind the optimum ranges for certain fertilizers, water soluble fertilizers, in order that those plants can actually absorb them. So in many cases, those really expensive pH meters, they ain't gonna do shit. They're not gonna make you more profit out of it. There's no freaking way. And the reason is, we did a couple of tests in the past decade or so with pH meters that we bought from Deal Extreme, actually in the beginning stages. Then we went to AliExpress, Temu and all that, and we tested multiple of them and compared them to Blue Lab Guardians, Milwaukee's, and even stuff from Hana. And even though the quality and plastics and all that is completely different, because yes, it's better quality to buy a Milwaukee pH meter than something from Temu, the sensor itself, it gave exactly the same reading. And the stuff from AliExpress and Temu cost me around €3 in comparison to stuff that's cost me around €200. And each 6 months I have to spend about 60 to 80, maybe even €100 to replace the sensor, because the sensor is going to break eventually. It's going to no longer be accurate because wear and tear, poor storage, or even though when people are storing it, they're slamming it in the ground, or it falls on the floor, or you tap it on something and it's going to snap the iron rod inside of it. It's really fragile. So therefore you have to buy a new one. So when you're growing, say, between 8 to 12 weeks, and you're buying the cheap pH sensors, which cost around €3 to €5, and you throw them away each 12 weeks, you actually are cheaper than buying the really expensive ones. There is one exception: when you're growing really large scale on industrial level. Then you have a pH meter like Blue Lab Guardian that's going to measure the reservoir continuously. But I'm not talking about a reservoir that's 1,000 liters. I'm talking about a reservoir that's over 10,000, 100,000 liters. That's completely different. Also, in most cases, Blue Lab Guardians are often used with dosatrons, which mixes up the batch of fertilizer and injects it into hoses and pipelines throughout the system. In most cases, it's drained to waste. So in a recirculating system, pH and EC is really important. But there's something that a lot of influencers skip, and this is something that's I really don't see that often on YouTube. It's not even that I see it really on Facebook or on Instagram or whatever. It's the temperature of the freaking water. I've seen so many people grow in a recirculating system in a really hot and humid environment, especially when they grow cannabis and they grow about 200-300 plants. I know that's not a lot, but still, they have a really big reservoir of water there. So water is a really good absorbent for heat. It's actually a piss poor in dissipating it. So when you have a really big container in an environment that's around 30 to 35 degrees Celsius, that water is going to stay 30 to 35 Celsius even a week later. It's piss poor in dissipating of heat. It's one of the reasons why water has to need a radiator in order to dissipating that stuff. But in a container, it's not going anywhere, so it's a breeding ground for pathogens, funguses and bacteria. And guess what? In a recirculating system where plants can develop root rot, PTM, or different types of diseases, yeah, it's going to spread out over and over and it's going to recirculating. And when you have one or two plants that are having certain types of disease, eventually when you have a closed loop system and it's recirculating, all the plants have exactly the same problem. Also, that temperature of water, it's actually decreasing your profit. So water temperature is actually really important, not only because of diseases, funguses and bacteria, but also the amount of oxygen inside the water. So the colder the water is, the more oxygen there is. The warmer and even above 28 degrees, it's really piss poor. That's one of the reasons why a lot of fish in aquariums struggle above a certain temperature range. So we went to a farm, a grower in Germany that's growing indicas, and they have about, again, 200 to 300 plants. So we advised them to put the tank outside. They have about a 1,000-liter tank and they placed it outside. So first of all, the tank and water in there is cooling down. It's way colder. So the efficiency of the plants and the absorption rate of the fertilizer and water is way more efficient. And the second actually advice is that they place a chiller on top of it. It's chilling the water continuously. So the water is no longer 30 to 35 degrees. It's actually 20 degrees all the time. Even though it's recirculating throughout those plants and coming back, it's cooled down before it's going back in the main container. So it's kicking up the amount of fertilizer and water that plants can absorb. It's cooling down the roots significantly because, well, the colder the roots are, the more and fitter the roots are. They actually produce thicker roots and more healthier roots when they're a little bit colder. There's less evaporation because cold water doesn't really like to evaporate. Diseases, funguses, bacteria and pathogens, they do not thrive in colder environments. And guess what? They can grow those plants in a way hotter environment because, well, you're not cooking the roots, you're not frying them. The roots are continually cold. So we made some micro adjustments and we used our own fertilizer. So the Flora Pro Grow and Bloom, and they're in the blooming stage right now. So there's a really big difference in how plants are growing, how people are using hydroponics and making those micro adjustments in order to grow those plants. Because a lot of people that are growing in hydro farms and towers and all that, they're only showing you the good part, only showing the amazing, how the plants are developing, how beautiful they are and all that. And that's fine, but they're not showing you the crap that's behind it. They're not showing you that they have to cool down the water. They're not showing you that they have to adjust the fertilizer all the freaking time. They're not showing you that the EC values switch around when the weather is changing. They're not showing you that evaporation happens, and if you're not really careful, when temperature is 35 degrees and the water is not cold, that the evaporation ratio is so high that the humidity in your grow room is skyrocketing to a point that actually you can have funguses in your leaves or even in your flower, and it's really damaging. So they're not showing you those things, they're only showing you the good parts. And that's one of the things why it's really annoying, for me at least, to see people growing plants in hydroponics and the most beautiful plants with, yeah, I don't know, millions of people watching the shit. But they're not telling that the biggest part of the problems are developed with water that's too hot. And they're frying the roots, they're recirculating diseases. And the next thing is, when you have cold water and a cold system, guess what? The fertilizer is stable. But when the water is hot and the system is cold, or the system is hot and the water is cold. So one of the problems is actually something that's also never been told, is that when you're using the wrong type of fertilizer, that even though it's designed for hydroponics, but it's not ever tested throughout the temperature changes, that you can build up plaque on the materials. So I'm growing basil right now in a hydro tower. Basil loves thriving and developing or sprouting in higher temperatures. So I'm letting the water to be around 27 degrees. I'm not going above the 28, otherwise I'm gonna do some real damage. But I do have a chiller. So eventually, when there's enough roots, I will activate the chiller and it will drop down this temperature to 20 degrees Celsius. But I'm using Flora Pro Grow. It's developed to work in a temperature range of about 15 degrees to 45 degrees Celsius. And it can fluctuate and do whatever, and it's sustainable and stable enough for at least a month in a system like a recirculating system of a hydro tower. In most cases I will throw away the fertilizer and water within a week, because obviously nitrogen is going to get depleted, or the phosphorus or potassium, and I really don't like deficiencies. But it will be stable for a month in a system like that. But when you buy fertilizers that's not designed for it, and they're using the wrong types of fertilizer or the wrong blend, you can actually build up skill in the micropores of plastic. And it's really annoying. It's the same as plaque in your veins. Eventually it will build up, and in a hydroponics tower you actually see down flakes of calcium and magnesium falling in the main tank. It gets sucked up with the pump, and eventually it will clog up the system and it will no longer run. In soil, when you don't give any water, there's always a little bit somewhere, so the plants will find something until it's bone dry. But when a system does not activate because the pump is full of scale or plaque, guess what? Within a couple of hours, especially in a grow room that's 35 degrees, and you're not giving it any water, they're done. So hydroponics, it's a pain in the ass. It's way more in start cost, in using different techniques, the right techniques, using the proper materials and equipment, using the right chemicals or additives. It's really important to choose the right stuff. And therefore a lot of people that grow in the gardens will say, well, it's a lot of work. But yeah, guess what? You're putting a lot of work in it, but you get also an astounding amount of product out of it. So chilling down water, yeah, you're using a chiller. And the chiller I'm using for around 20 liters, it's around 100 watts. But guess what? I'm using a solar panel, so the energy is free. The system I'm using, I bought on eBay for 20 euros. It works throughout a Peltier system, so there's a heat exchange. It's really easy to cool down because it actually has the capability of freezing the water if I'm not very careful. But yeah, I see my crop grow every day. I see healthy roots every day. We don't see a lot of problems because there aren't any pathogens or diseases spreading out throughout the system. But yeah, it's way more work. And that's something you never see on YouTube. You never hear people complain about hydroponics because it's always the good things that they're sharing. But yeah, it's not only checking EC or making micro adjustments in the pH, but checking that your fertilizer is actually going around or not clogging up your system, or choosing the right amount of plants or the right type of plant. The thing that a lot of people will just skip is the temperature of your water. So yeah.